This all took place a few years back, right as the school year was wrapping up. It was the final day of 8th grade, the kind of day filled with that typical mix of excitement and end-of-year nostalgia. Everyone was bouncing around trying to collect signatures and goofy little notes in their yearbooks. Our middle school was massive, well over 1,000 students. So to keep things from getting chaotic, the teachers had us turn in our yearbooks. They were passed around from class to class, so everyone had a fair shot at signing each other's. You can probably imagine how that could backfire. Basically, anyone could write whatever they wanted in anyone's book. The staff did their best to keep it respectful, but still, I knew a few kids who took that as a chance to leave some pretty nasty stuff for people they didn't like. Later that day, when I got mine back, I started flipping through it, laughing at all the silly notes my friends left. But something strange caught my attention. On one of the pages, under the photo of someone I couldn't place at all, there was a signature. The name was Samuel Robinson II, and I swear I'd never heard of him before. I've remembered that name ever since. What he wrote was simple but kind of eerie. It said, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." I stared at it, completely thrown off. I had no idea who this Samuel kid was. I'd never talked to him, not even once. But what could I do? The school year had ended. There was no way to track him down even if I wanted to, so I just shrugged it off, figured maybe it was just some random kid being odd, or maybe he signed the wrong book by mistake. Either way, I pushed it out of my mind. That night, I had a few of my best friends over, Kevin, David, and Kieran. We crashed in my basement, eating chips and playing Call of Duty way past midnight. My parents' room was all the way up on the 3rd floor, so we didn't really have to worry about being too loud. Around 2 a.m., we were messing around with my dad's rowing machine when we suddenly heard this loud knock at the storm door. It immediately froze all of us. Who knocks on a storm door at that hour? It had to be someone trying not to wake up my parents, or someone who already knew we were down in the basement, or maybe both. Either way, it made no sense. The knocking kept coming, same pattern each time. Just a steady, deliberate rhythm. I saw Kieran about to open his mouth, and before I could stop him, he called out loudly, asking who was there. I wanted to throw something at him. He might as well have shouted, "We're right here." Our basement didn't have any windows to the outside, so whoever it was probably didn't know anyone was down there, until Kieran spoke up. There was a long pause. No more knocks. Then a muffled voice replied, "Come around to the back door." The voice was weirdly upbeat, like someone casually trying to join in on the fun. It definitely sounded like a teenager, not like someone faking it or putting on a voice either. Just cheerful. Like he was a friend dropping by uninvited. I was nervous, genuinely, but the others didn't seem all that concerned. If anything, they were weirdly into it, like this whole thing was some kind of adventure. They kept pushing me to go check it out. I wasn't on board, but they wouldn't let it go. So eventually, I gave in. We crept upstairs together, careful not to make a sound. I slowly made my way to the back door, heart racing. There was a narrow glass panel beside it, and through it, I could make out a dark figure standing under the faint porch light. As I stepped in closer, his face came into focus, and I swear, I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. The moment I got a clear look at his face, I knew exactly who it was. It was him, Samuel Robinson II. The same kid who'd signed that odd message in my yearbook. My friends started heading toward the door like they were actually going to open it. I have no idea what they were thinking, but I stepped in fast and stopped them. I told them I recognized the guy and quickly explained the whole yearbook thing. That definitely shifted the mood. Meanwhile, Sam was still outside, standing in plain view through the glass. He could clearly see us, and from the way he was watching me, I think he picked up on how unsettled I was. A few seconds later, he started pointing toward the side of the house, gesturing like he wanted me to come over to one of the windows. Now, you might wonder why we weren't treating this like a bigger deal, but honestly, I think it was because he wasn't some grown man creeping around. He was just another student, someone from school. Still, I wasn't about to unlock the door. Instead, I went to the kitchen window and cracked it open just enough to hear him. The others followed, keeping close, but slightly behind me. He made his way over and stopped just outside the window. I asked what he was doing here and mentioned that I recognized his name from the yearbook. He replied, "Oh, so you got my message," and introduced himself again as Sam. Then, without skipping a beat, he started telling me that he used to watch me from a distance. Said he thought we could have been close friends. I nodded along just to keep things calm, but there was absolutely no world where I'd have ever been friends with this kid. I didn't want to come on too strong, but I needed to ask, so I went for it. I asked him how he even knew where I lived. He didn't say a word. Before I could try to ease the tension, David suddenly called him a creepy stalker and told him to leave. Sam just stared for a second, tilting his head like he didn't even understand what David meant. Then his whole face changed. In an instant, that weirdly calm look twisted into something way darker. All I saw in his expression was pure anger. He switched in an instant, from oddly calm and almost friendly to completely unhinged. Suddenly, he was shouting at me, yelling that he hated my friends and that we all deserved to die. He even brought up stuff about my ex and other personal things he had no business knowing. Then he lunged at the window and tried to force it open. I reacted fast, slammed it shut and locked it before he could get it all the way up. He started growling at the glass, slamming his fists on it like he'd lost all control. It was honestly like watching an animal lose it. I was certain he was about to smash right through. We must have made a lot of noise because, out of nowhere, my parents came rushing down the stairs, asking why we were making such a racket. The second they appeared, Sam took off running. I explained what had happened as quickly as I could. My dad ran outside, barefoot, still in his underwear, but came back a few minutes later saying the kid was gone, nowhere in sight. For whatever reason, my parents didn't contact the police. They told us to go try and get some rest and that they'd follow up with the school in the morning. I guess they figured maybe it was just some troubled kid acting out and didn't want to jump to conclusions. The next day, they got in touch with the school. That's when we found out something that really messed with my head. Sam had been expelled from school a few weeks before the year ended. He wasn't even supposed to be there on the last day. The reason he still showed up in the yearbook was because they had already gone to print before he got kicked out. So that meant he must have snuck into the building just to leave me that note. That part alone gave me chills. Even after working with the school to figure out what happened, no one could locate him. There were no records of where he or his family lived. It was like they just disappeared. The whole thing became a serious matter, but the school seemed to want to keep it quiet. What still gets under my skin to this day, more than anything else, is not knowing how he found out where I lived. That's what really scares me. The most common explanation people give is that Sam was a disturbed kid dealing with some serious issues. And for whatever reason, he fixated on me. No one knows how long he might have been watching me. My parents were on edge for weeks afterward. It's not something any of us bring up anymore. The whole thing is just too unsettling. But living in that house never felt the same again after that night. Now, shifting to something else, my friend Garrett. Let me just say, he's not exactly the most stable guy. Actually, that's putting it mildly. Garrett's the type who wears his wild behavior like a badge of honor. He's always bragging about how aggressive and unpredictable he is, like that's something to be proud of. He's the kind of person who picks fights over nothing, says whatever's on his mind no matter the situation, and spends more time at the gym than anywhere else, even his own home. I could tell at least 5 different stories involving Garrett that are genuinely unsettling, but the one that stands out the most, the one that actually involved me, is what I'm going to talk about next. It happened just a couple of weeks ago. Coincidentally, it was the last day of our senior year, May 2019. Our graduation ceremony wasn't for a few more days, so even though classes were over, we were still hanging around campus. It's a tradition at our school for the seniors to go all out and get completely wasted after their last day of classes, and yeah, we followed that tradition to the letter. There's this big clock tower right in the middle of campus where all the seniors gather to party, and that's exactly where we were by 10 p.m. The place was packed, easily over 1,000 people in that one courtyard. For me, it was kind of a mix of emotions, a little sentimental, but also a sense of relief. Finals at our school are no joke, and everyone felt like they could finally breathe. There are a bunch of other weird senior traditions I could talk about too, but I'll try to stay focused on this one. There were 6 of us that night, me, CTRN, and of course, Garrett. The others aren't people who'd want their names shared, so I'll just refer to them by their initials. Quick side note, we didn't live on campus. Our place was a bit of a walk away, so heading back meant making our way through the city. Late at night, it wasn't unusual to run into some of the local homeless population. That area had its fair share, and most of them were either zoned out or just kept to themselves, but not this time. We were heading back from the clock tower, still riding the high from the night when something happened that, in true Garrett fashion, quickly escalated. As we crossed an intersection, this homeless guy suddenly appeared and came straight toward us, clearly tweaking out. Usually folks in his condition just wander around and ignore anyone else, lost in their own world. But this guy was different. He wanted interaction. He stopped right in the middle of the crosswalk, shouting random stuff at us like he was guarding a gate, and we needed permission to pass. It was bizarre. We didn't want to provoke anything, so most of us started curving our path around him, keeping a respectful distance and avoiding eye contact. Everyone, that is, except Garrett. Rather than stay quiet or steer clear, he shouted back, telling the guy to get out of the street and stop bothering people. Naturally, that didn't go over well. The guy stepped toward Garrett, suddenly looking like he might actually try something. That's when the rest of us stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. Maybe it worked. The man backed off, no longer advancing, but still ranting loudly. I tried pulling Garrett away, hoping he'd let it go, but instead, he jerked his arm out of my grip. And just like that, we were one wrong move away from this spiraling into something worse. Garrett suddenly broke into a full sprint, straight toward the guy, yelling, "I'm crazy!" at the top of his lungs. The tweaker didn't wait around to find out if he meant it. He took off running, and Garrett came to a stop, laughing hysterically. I'll admit it, the moment was ridiculous. As wrong as it might sound, the whole thing looked like someone charging into a flock of pigeons just to watch them scatter. After that, we kept heading toward our place, but a few blocks in, we noticed something that made the mood shift. The same guy was still behind us. He wasn't close, but he wasn't far enough away either. And when he realized we were looking back at him, he started shouting again. This time it was stuff like, "You guys messed up," and something about calling a niche, whatever that was supposed to mean. We tried throwing a few comments back his way, mostly hoping he'd get rattled and just walk off. But if anything, it only made him more worked up. I'm not proud of how we handled any of it, but we were hours into partying. The end of senior year had hit, and most of us weren't exactly thinking clearly. As we neared our street, it became clear the guy hadn't dropped it. He was still tailing us, though he was keeping a bit more distance now. That's when I said what we were all thinking, that I really didn't want to lead him straight to our front door. The rest of the group agreed, but before we could figure out what to do, Garrett made the decision for us. He bolted off again, running right at the guy for the second time. Once more, the guy panicked and sprinted off down the street. Garrett turned around, casually jogged back to us, and we all picked up the pace to get home. This time, we were pretty sure we'd shaken him. We got back to the house, and at that point, we didn't see him anywhere. I'm not even going to get into what happened after that. It's not really part of the story. Let's just say whatever went on afterward was the kind of reckless behavior I'm in no rush to repeat. I don't even know what time it was when I stumbled outside to grab my DoorDash order. That's when I noticed something strange. The side gate, the one that leads into our backyard, was wide open. That immediately felt off because we always kept it closed with a bit of twine looped around it. So if it was open, someone had definitely undone it on purpose. Right away, it clicked. It had to be that same guy from earlier. I had enough clarity to make the connection, but not enough to act smart about it. The right move would have been to go back inside and tell the others. But in the state I was in, I decided to check it out myself. I set the food down on the front steps and started walking around the side of the house, doing my best to keep steady. The second I turned into the backyard, something caught me from behind. A rope tightened around my neck. I couldn't see him, but I knew someone was there pulling hard, choking me. I thrashed and kicked, but he had me locked in, dragging the rope tighter. The rough fibers bit into my skin, and for a few terrifying seconds, I was sure that was it. With everything I had, I threw my weight backward, somehow managing to knock him off balance. We both hit the ground. I gasped, finally able to breathe, but he wasn't done, and he was on top of me, swinging and clawing. I felt the sharp sting as he raked across my face, and I could feel the blood start to run. Somehow I managed to shove him off. He staggered up and without a word bolted out of view. I'll keep the rest brief. I ended up in the ER that night. The cuts weren't too deep, but I had to get a full round of shots in case the guy had anything, just to be safe. The police didn't really offer much help, and with me moving out just a week later, there wasn't a whole lot I could do either. Honestly, what frustrated me most was that all my graduation pictures had visible cuts on my face. Garrett actually felt guilty about the whole thing, so much so that he ended up taking me to Nobu to try and make up for it. But I never blamed him. I just hoped the whole incident taught him not to pick fights with people who clearly have nothing to lose. Anyway, going back a few years, when I was in 7th grade, there was a kid in my homeroom named Sven. The best way to describe him? Unusual. He was one of those kids who stayed completely to himself. Not because others excluded him. In fact, people often tried to get him involved. He just never responded to it. I didn't share every class with him, but when I did, he always sat in the same spot, way in the back corner, diagonally across from the classroom door. Every single time. He wore the same outfit daily, baggy cargo shorts and a big burgundy hoodie. Sven didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was unusually deep for someone our age. A lot of kids made fun of him for it. Immature, but that's how middle school was. I honestly don't think he had any friends at all, and that didn't come as a surprise to anyone. There was one time my friend Tyler saw him cutting up worms at recess. He actually got detention for that. Speaking of recess, Sven always spent the full time alone by the chain-link fence that ran along the woods. He never joined in on games, never interacted with anyone, just stood there by himself. A couple of friends swore they saw him talking to someone beyond the fence, but I never witnessed it myself, so I won't pretend that's fact. Trying to think if there's anything else worth mentioning. He definitely had his share of odd behaviors and quirks, the kind you sometimes see in middle school. But most of it wasn't really connected to what I'm about to share next. This all took place on the last day of school. My middle school was pretty large, with a big student body in each grade. So there were always multiple classes happening at the same time with kids from the same year. Because of that, a kind of unofficial tradition developed. On the last day, students would sneak into different classrooms just to confuse or mess with the teachers. I think most of the teachers knew what was going on and played along just to keep the day light and fun. But either way, it became a thing. I don't recall the exact time, but I do remember I was in one of the few classes I happened to share with Sven. The vibe was typical of the day, kind of chaotic. There were students everywhere, and most of them clearly didn't belong in that particular class. Now, I was one of those kids who followed rules to a T. That's just how I was brought up. So while all my friends were off roaming into random classrooms, I stayed where I was supposed to be. That meant, more often than not, I ended up by myself in class. This was one of those moments. My group of friends had already headed off somewhere else together, and the only person in the room I was even remotely familiar with was Sven. And he was definitely acting off that day, more than usual. That's something I remember clearly. I can't tell you what subject we were supposed to be learning or what the teacher had us doing, but I do remember Sven bouncing his foot nonstop. Hard. That wasn't something I'd ever seen him do before. He also kept glancing around the classroom like he was either searching for someone or trying to keep track of certain people. It didn't seem like he was watching me specifically, though I couldn't say for sure. Another thing that stood out was the number of unfamiliar faces in the room. Having a few kids I didn't recognize wasn't strange, given the classroom mix-ups. But this was different. There were way too many students I didn't recognize at all, and that didn't sit right with me. I think the teacher's name was Ms. Bell. That afternoon, she told us to split into small groups, 3 or 4 people, to work on some end-of-year reflection activity. Nothing intense. Most of the class just used it as an excuse to chat and joke around. At one point, Ms. Bell walked over to her desk, picked up the classroom phone, and turned away from the class as she spoke into it. A couple of minutes later, another teacher came by, probably from the classroom next door. The two of them stepped just outside into the hallway and began whispering to each other. It was a short exchange, maybe 30 seconds, but it felt strange. like they were intentionally keeping their voices low so the class wouldn't notice. Something about it gave me a weird feeling. Ms. Bell looked uneasy. That's the only way I can describe it. Her whole posture seemed tense. When they came back in, neither of them addressed the class. Instead, they walked over to a handful of students and crouched beside their desks to quietly talk to them. I couldn't make out a word, but it was clear they were keeping their voices low for a reason. After a minute or so, those same students got up and followed the two teachers out of the room. Nobody else seemed to pay it much attention. It felt like I was the only one who even noticed how odd it was. A few minutes later, Ms. Bell returned, this time alone. She didn't mention the students who had left. She just sat back down at her desk and started organizing some papers like everything was normal. And then, without warning, the fire alarm went off. Ms. Bell barely flinched. It was like she expected it, and she calmly told us to line up and head outside, and we joined the rest of the school out on the field behind the building. As usual, during drills or evacuations, everyone gathered by homeroom, so I ended up with a lot of the same classmates I was familiar with. As we were all standing out on the field, something made me glance back at the school building. Not for any particular reason, just out of habit, I think. That's when I noticed something. In one of the second-floor windows, there was a flicker of movement, just a quick flash, like something shifted behind the glass. Maybe it was a shadow, maybe just a trick of the light, but it didn't feel right. The school was supposed to be empty. I didn't say anything about it, but when it was time to go back inside, I felt this heaviness in my chest. I didn't want to re-enter that building. Turns out we never did. Before the alarm even cut off, we began hearing sirens in the distance. And then, minutes later, a line of police cruisers came speeding into the lot. Not just one or two, but a whole convoy. The officers didn't waste a second. They jumped out and headed straight into the school. No announcements, no explanations. The teachers just told us to stay calm and remain where we were. Eventually, someone came around and said that school was being dismissed early, but there were no buses. We had to contact our parents to get picked up. They never told us what actually happened. Later that day, my parents gave me a version of the story, or at least what the school had shared with them. Apparently, several kids who weren't even students there had somehow gotten inside the building. Rumors were flying that they had planned to set something on fire. From what my parents heard, Ms. Bell had found something disturbing in one of their backpacks, tools or materials serious enough to trigger an evacuation. That's what set off the drill. I'm still fuzzy on all the details, but I'm trying to describe it as best I can. The part that stayed with me the most is what my mom said at the end. She told me those kids had been let in through the side fence during recess, and the one who let them in was Sven. It's hard to make sense of it even now. After that day, I never saw Sven again.